Bonjour à tous. Hello, welcome. Buenas tardes. Je suis Isabelle Ferreras, je coordonne la chaire Aung San Suu Kyi, démocratie, culture et engagement. Et nous avons le plaisir aujourd'hui de démarrer notre seconde série de séminaires, la deuxième année de création de la chaire Aung San Suu Kyi. Et cette année, donc, le séminaire portera sur les enjeux de la violence et de la non-violence dans les transitions. Alors, avant de passer la parole à notre invité principal, qui est Boaventura De Sousa Santos, que tout le monde connaît, professeur à l'université de Coimbra, au Portugal, aussi à l'université du Wisconsin, Madison, aux États-Unis, qui sera ensuite discuté et par deux intervenants qui lanceront le débat. Jean Demingue, professeur dans cette université, professeur de sociologie, et Maria Angelica Sanchez Alvarez, qui est une chercheuse en droit, ici au Centre de philosophie du droit, et qui nous aideront à lancer le débat qui suivra. Je vais à présent passer la parole à Mathieu Nanteuil, qui est un des copromoteurs de la chaire Aung San Suu Kyi, avec nos deux collègues de droit, Marc Verdussen et Philippe Coppens, pour que Mathieu puisse nous introduire à cette transition entre la première et la deuxième année de séminaire. Nous avons choisi aujourd'hui de pouvoir enchaîner après un travail qui a porté sur les transitions constitutionnelles. Mais Mathieu, il faut que tu aies un micro. Donc peut-être Jean peut approcher son micro. Non. Non. Non, parce on a besoin des micros pour l'enregistrement. Donc on va prendre un micro main. Ah oui, aussi sinon. Mais parce que en fait.
Bien, bonjour à tous. Vous m'entendez là? Oui. Bon.
Non, c'est
celui-là. Elle démarre.
Fonctionne.
Bien, bonjour à tous. Écoutez, je ne vais pas être très long, simplement pour vous donner quelques éléments pour resituer un peu cette deuxième année du séminaire. Le projet de la chaire a été de s'intéresser aux fondations du projet démocratique, notamment dans des contextes difficiles, lorsque la question démocratique suit des guerres civiles, des phases de dictature, voire des phases totalitaires. Autrement dit, quand la démocratie est attaquée dans ses fondements. Et l'ambition qui est celle de la chaire, c'est de repenser la transition vers le projet démocratique en sortant de l'idée d'une transition simple ou facile et en essayant de problématiser toutes les dimensions qui sont à l'œuvre. Alors l'an passé, ce qui est apparu assez clairement, ça a été le projet, c'était de se dire au fond, ce qui d'abord est au cœur de cette transition, c'est la reconstruction d'un état de droit qui se reconnaisse dans la loi fondamentale, qui est la Constitution. Et donc on a eu une série de réflexions sur les transitions constitutionnelles, pilotées par les deux juristes copromoteurs de la chaire, Marc Verdussen et Philippe Coppens, qui sont ici. On a eu une série de discussions extrêmement intéressantes sur la fabrique de la Constitution, tout en ayant à l'esprit et tout en observant que si la Constitution était une dimension fondamentale, c'était pas la seule dimension nécessaire à la réalisation du projet démocratique. Et surtout, la Constitution faisait toujours fond sur un ensemble de rapports sociaux qui étaient marqués profondément par la question de la violence. Et on s'est dit, tiens, au fond, d'un point de vue plus sociologique cette fois, est-ce qu'il ne faudrait pas essayer de s'intéresser directement à cette question ? Non pas encore, j'insiste, non pas pour minorer les enjeux proprement juridiques d'une loi fondamentale, mais pour en comprendre les difficultés et surtout en comprendre le contexte. Étant entendu, et c'est très bien ressorti l'année dernière, que les effets pratiques de cette Constitution vont varier selon précisément la capacité d'une société à s'émanciper, plus ou moins, du problème de la violence. Dans ce contexte, on a choisi de faire une deuxième année de séminaire qui s'intéresse plus à cette question-là, tout en essayant de maintenir le lien entre le volet juridique et le volet plus sociologique, si vous voulez. Et donc, on a essayé de rapprocher tout ça, et on s'est dit, au fond, qu'un des enjeux, un premier enjeu, c'était de réfléchir justement à la place de la violence dans la transition constitutionnelle, mais dans la période de transition, dans la dynamique de transition elle-même. En essayant d'articuler le volet juridique avec les autres volets possibles. Et donc, personne n'était mieux placé que Boaventura De Sousa Santos pour aborder ces questions. C'est un sociologue du droit, c'est un éminent sociologue du droit, qui donc, je crois, a toujours réfléchi au rapport entre droit et société. Société au singulier, hein, pas le droit des sociétés, au sens juridique du terme, mais droit et société, droit et rapports sociaux. Et donc, c'est à lui que je passe la parole pour essayer d'aborder ces questions. Merci encore, Boa, como se dice. Es un placer recibir y escucharle.
Alors, effectivement, on a choisi, comme vous avez vu, l'annonce était en français, la conférence sera en anglais. Il y a beaucoup de personnes qui sont plurilingues dans la salle, et donc, en hommage à la pluralité des épistémés, on va maintenir plusieurs langues de travail, mais singulièrement le français et l'anglais, et si besoin l'espagnol, le portugais, on verra, mais donc surtout français-anglais.
Merci à tous d'être ici. C'est un plaisir de revenir à Louvain. Comme vous savez, je ne vais pas parler le français parce que le français était ma seconde langue au Portugal. Mais après ça, c'était l'allemand et après l'anglais et maintenant c'est l'anglais. Alors c'est plus facile pour moi de parler en anglais qu'en français, mais j'entends parfaitement toutes les questions qui peuvent être posées en français. Il n'y a pas de problème pour moi. Okay, thank you so much for the invitation, Isabelle, Mathieu, Jean, Marie-Angelique, for being here with me. It's a great pleasure to come back to Louvain-la-Neuve. I was here, I think it was last year or before last. It looks like I like the place. You are doing very interesting work, and I'm very glad to join you in this project. Am I speaking too fast? Do you want me to speak slowly, more slowly? Okay. Well, because I think the assignment is quite complex, because violence and law is already rather complex. Violence and law in the process of transition is even worse. Particularly because the concepts are overloaded. All these three concepts, violence, law, and transition, are overloaded with meanings from different disciplines, from different concerns, from different problematic. I just come from Berlin, I came yesterday from Berlin to participate in a conference precisely on transitions. Using transition in the Gramscian term, the period in which the old is about to end but does not end completely, and the new is about to begin but has not begun yet. So that was a time that Gramsci said this is a time of monsters. And so you were analyzing which are the monsters in our time. Or even deeper, are we monstrous? And these questions ourselves, since we live so comfortably within the monsters, that probably there is some monstruosity about our social sciences and about our universities and so on. But I was not going into this discussion, but another one is a great Cuban intellectual from the turn of the 20th century, José Martí, that wrote in 1895. He was a journalist like Marx before. He made a living writing newspapers articles, and he said, well, it's very difficult for me to write from the entrails of the monster. So he lived inside the monster, which was the United States, Manhattan. How can I speak? He was in the struggle against the U.S. imperialism in Cuba, which later on would lead to the war, and in fact he was assassinated during the period of the war, was killed during that period. So I think that Gramsci, in a sense, brought this idea of transition to a very broad spectrum, and so broad that probably the concept of transition has become meaningless. Because if we are always in transition, we are never in transition. Because if societies are not stagnant, I mean, they are in transit. All of us are in transit. So we have to specify which is the meaning that we give to the word of transition, because I think that there are lots of transition, there are oxymorons, contradictions in terms. Infinite transitions, indefinite transitions, perpetual transitions. I'm going to give some examples. And believe it or not, the concept of transition has been used in these cases. For instance, the underdeveloped countries have been in perpetual transition to become developed. When did it start? Probably when the concept development was created. When will it end? Well, one day, but 100 years have passed, and they are still underdeveloped. Most of them that were underdeveloped then are still underdeveloped. So there are countries today that international law and international politics go on considering that they are barbarian or almost barbarian. They are not truly civilized. So they are in transition from barbarism to civilization. But they have been so since the 15th century. And I'm going to give you examples of some politics, dominant politics, that is premised upon the idea that the divide between civilization and barbarism goes on, and that there are countries that are barbarian. That's why we should intervene in them, because they are not fully civilized. And if we go back to some of histories, we'll see that. So I want to problematize these perpetual transitions as a way of showing more closely the ones that make more sense. The transitions that you are talking about here in this group, of course, is a transition which has usually a very well-defined beginning and probably a well-defined end, or at least an objective, which is very well-defined, and therefore they are temporal. And that's why they are transitional, mutation from one state to the next, right? But there are many today that we can use, and the concept of transition is being used in many processes in our world today. For instance, Cuba. Is Cuba in transition from state socialism to state capitalism? There's a discussion that is going on in Cuba now, the transition. Is Colombia in a process of transition from civil war to peace? Yeah, it is said that precisely the peace negotiations before with the FARC and now with LLN, they are negotiations to allow for the transition from civil war to peace. And if we take Myanmar, very close to this group, it's a transition from dictatorship to democracy. That's what we would call. In fact, the bibliography and the studies, the literature on transitions was based on precisely the transition from dictatorship to democracy. That's where you find the most transitional studies. But I think the issue is much broader. In many countries that don't consider themselves in transition, they are in fact in transition. Angola, for instance. Angola is an example of a country that was multi-party system, but everybody, and their elections will be soon be held, everybody sees, the ones inside, sometimes people outside don't see that, but inside, that this is a transition to democracy, and that's why it'll take some time. But there are other types of transition that are much more difficult to trace. I already mentioned the infinite or indefinite ones. I'm going to also mention the invisible ones. Are there invisible transitions going on? For instance, is Europe going through an invisible transition from social democracy to liberal democracy? Is there in the world a transition, a reactionary transition, from democracy to new forms of dictatorship. When we look at the extreme right in the United States or in Europe, are these transitions? And we have one very special transition, very dear to many of us that have been working along with the people that have been involved in this transition in South Africa, from the apartheid to the post-apartheid. Well, we know when the transition began, 1994, for some 1993, as it ended, with the finishing of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or not, or is still on. And which was the transit, in fact, was from apartheid to democracy, or from apartheid to neo-apartheid, as many people today claim. So it is a contested terrain, which are the transitions, where they are going from and from where. But there is the longest one, probably after, no, before even, the longest perpetual transition, which I'd like to, in a sense, I'm constructing the concept of transition in order to be able to reconstruct it. The longest transition, the most perpetual one, is the colonial transition. It started in 15th century and is not ended. That is to say, the countries that were colonized by the Europeans and got independence in the early 20th century, in the early 19th century or mid 20th century, are they independent? Is a transition that has ended? Or we are facing a metamorphosis of colonialism. Colonialism goes on under different forms. So what is the nature of this transition? So these are the problems that I think we should confront in order to be able to address some of the issues which I'd like to deal here, so that we then can really try, once we trace what the transition is, then we can ascribe some normative values to the transition, not just description, but normative values. Successful transition versus unsuccessful transition. Good transition versus bad transition. Legitimate transition versus illegitimate transition. Progressive transition versus retrogressive transition. I think if we look at this, the questions you really unpack, when we try to unpack the title of this lecture, and I faced myself with this assignment, quite frankly, this is an immense field of topics that come out. And the more so, once you try to bring together law together with this, because transition, violence, and law. Well, what law? Which law? Whose law? I think that this topic is going to force us to unpack the concept of law, the concept of violence, if you want to understand what's going on, I think. Because depending on the conceptions, we may have three instances of the relationship between law and violence. One is the law as causing violence, law as violence. A second one is law as justifying violence. And the third one is law as reducing violence. And it's not clear that the last one, which is the one that is implicit in your title, is probably the most important one. It's probably the most exceptional one. So I think that we have to unpack also law and violence in order to understand what's going on. And here a problem comes up, an analytical problem, political theory and philosophy, political philosophy, which I think is most interesting. because law and violence is a sub-theme of a broader problem, the relationship between power or politics and violence. Because once we deal with law in this context, we are dealing with power, we are dealing with politics, and in fact, the relationship between them and violence. And here you find two very different, opposite, contradictory positions in the Western way of thinking political theory. There is one tradition that says that violence is inextricably connected, intimately intertwined with violence. In a sense, there is no politics without violence. Not to say that politics is violence, but that there is no politics without violence. Well, this tradition comes from Machiavelli, everybody knows, and is reproduced in Hobbes, is reproduced in Weber, the state as the power with legitimate violence, as Weber defines the state. Marx, about the violence, revolutionary violence in social relations. Sorel, Sartre, and of course Fanon, Frantz Fanon. This is one tradition, and for many of these authors, then they are premised upon the need to distinguish between bad and good violence, permissible and non-permissible, legitimate and illegitimate, as I mentioned before. But then we have another tradition in the Western thinking, which is just the opposite, is that politics and violence contradict each other. They are antithetical. So whenever there is violence, there is no politics. When there is politics, there is no violence. This tradition is the liberal tradition. It comes from the contractarians, the social contract people, and Locke, we can see that. Locke, of course, was a slaveholder, but doesn't contradict his ideas of power without violence. And comes down to John Rawls, Nozick, Habermas, and even Arendt. So the idea that politics is about, and power is about persuasion, about consent, about reason, about discussion, and therefore against violence. And whenever there is violence, there is no way for violence. If there is politics, there is no place for violence. Well, it's interesting as political philosophers and sociologists of politics and law. We like these debates, and it's a very interesting debate, and particularly because it's very interesting formulated in the debate between Arendt and Fanon, because Fanon published The Rest of the Earth in 1961, and Arendt publishes On Violence in 1969, and therefore there is a debate there. And there are very different positions. I can refer you to a paper in which I deal at length how the two see in different ways violence. Is violence constitutive of politics, as Fanon seems to say, or is violence destructive of politics, as Arendt seems to be saying? But the interesting thing is that both, in fact, aim at a society without violence, both Fanon and Arendt. And it's probably not usually very well recognized, is that Arendt also recognizes that in certain circumstances, violence is legitimate, is required. It's the only way to fight some power. So if we take these two traditions, then we have to probably make some decisions. And for those that know my work, I know that I side with Fanon and not with Arendt. I think that it would be a good project to have politics without violence, but as long as we have three modes of domination in our societies, which are not submitted to democratic rules, and they are capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, there is violence, because there is violence in social relations. And if there is violence in social relations, we cannot think of politics without considering that politics may be contaminated by it. It's not the opposite, because unless politics would be some angelic institution that would live above the realities of people, of colonized people that are assassinated, women that are violated, and so on and so forth. So these assassinations, this violence is not anti-political. Very often it's part of a political plan. And we know that. Because if you take Arendt's position, whenever there is violence, there's anti-politics. There's no politics there. What about the destruction that is politically motivated? Why is that in all the recent wars, rape of women is part of the war? In any of the recent wars, and not so recent, the war is political, rape is political, and therefore I think that we should consider this as an element. But this creates a problem, is that if we consider that politics is intertwined with violence, politics is not just violence. Of course, we know that. We have elections, we have discussions, we have debates on television, we have things like that. So we have to ascribe the place of violence, and for that we have to define violence, of course. And we have also to see that the law in politics is the instrument that is used to distinguish between legitimate violence and illegitimate violence. So there are forms of legitimate violence and forms of illegitimate violence. But is that enough? The fact that law legitimizes violence, is it enough for us? Is the end of the conversation? In a sense, for the positivists, that's the end. If a law legitimizes certain kinds of violence, for instance, can be violence, physical violence, or structural violence, or symbolic violence, or psychological violence. For instance, the law of 1982 that refused citizenship to the Rohingya people in Myanmar. It's a violence of exclusion. The law, is a law legitimate? Well, if you are a positivist, you say, yes, the law comes from a Schmittian person. You see, the law comes from a legitimate political order and therefore is legitimate. Well, I think that if you are not a positivist, then you have to see the normative values, the ethics behind the process. We have to understand, and this is going to be very important for us in the following, when we see law at odds with the normative, the ethical construction of the countries where law is applied. A dissonance between what law says and what the culture says. So in this second part, I'm going to focus on two types of transition. And I focus on two types because I think that the two are really intertwined, and they help, particularly the case that in this fund that we have here, Aung San Suu Kyi, should be an important one. The first one is the indefinite, perpetual transition from capitalism to non-capitalism. A transition that in my theory and in my work does not transit at all. And the second one is from dictatorship to democracy. Well, if you look at the first transition, then from the work that I've been producing, my research, empirical and theoretical, shows very clearly to me that in fact there is a continuity from the 15th century up until now on the ways in which capitalism cannot operate without colonialism. It was that in the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, and it's true today. So we don't live in post-colonial societies. We live in colonial futures, so to say. And when we talk about post-colonial, is to show that colonialism has not ended. In fact, post-colonial studies mean precisely that. Post-colonial studies is a study about the fact that colonialism goes on under different ways. That's basically our idea. But post-colonial as being the end of colonialism because the countries became independent, no. I think we live in colonial societies in general on a world scale, as we live in capitalist societies. What is the structure of law in this? So this is what I've been calling the abyssal law, because it's based on the idea that from modernity, West modernity is divided from the very beginning by an abyssal line that divides the metropolitan societies from colonial societies. And this line is absolutely crucial to understand what's going on and is absolutely invisible. Our theories, our universal general theories of law were based on law in the metropolitan societies. Because in the colonies, different types of laws, different types of governments took place. But they didn't contradict what was going on in the metropolitan side. That's what is the abyssal line between the metropolitan society and the colonial society. Today, probably we shouldn't speak about societies, but forms of sociability. That is to say, there are metropolitan forms of sociability and colonial forms of sociability. And they exist on the global north and on the global south. And I can give you some examples of what I'm thinking. But before that, I'd like to lay out the distinction, the main distinction. The main distinction is that law and politics in the metropolitan sociability is run by two key tensions, by one key tension between two concepts: regulation, social regulation, and social emancipation. And if we analyze in our modern societies the questions of rights, the rule of law, democracy, constitution, all of them have been geared to guarantee a managed tension between social regulation and social emancipation, all alike. And what we call progress is the fact that this tension exists, and we are aiming at new forms of social regulation, better regulations. That what we call social emancipation is a better regulation, something better. So social emancipation have public education, yeah, because we had previously private education was a form of social regulation. We struggled for public education as an emancipatory project, and we conquered public education. So, and from then on, it's part of our social regulation. So the tension between regulation and emancipation is constitutive of Western modernity. And for many years, I myself, even in my work, thought or wrote as if this was valid for the whole world. But of course it wasn't. It was only valid for the metropolitan side of the world. For the colonial side of the world, this was not valid, because there was no tension between regulation and emancipation. There, the tension is between appropriation and violence. We cannot appropriate everything. We cannot kill the slaves, because otherwise there is no work. So there is a tension between appropriation and violence, but no regulation or emancipation. It's a different one, right? And these two sides of the Western modernity keep incommensurable. They are incommensurable. They are not visible, and they were not visible for a long time, because the abyssal line prevents us from seeing what is on the other side of the line. And that's why in the Epistemology of the South, I dedicate a section to the sociology of absences. We have to try to analyze things that exist, but they were made as non-existent. And therefore we have to do a sociology of absences, which in positivistic terms would be a nonsense, because if it's absence, I can't do a sociology of something that does not exist. It does exist. Or the lives and forms of regulation that the people themselves that exist in the colonies and still exist in colonial ways of sociability, they organize their lives. But we don't consider that relevant once we see that the abyssal line divides these two societies. And now, from this, three examples, very simple examples, that you can understand what I'm saying. In the 19th century, I think I mentioned that in a previous talk here, but I'm just going through it very fast. In the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, great celebration throughout Europe because we are going to witness the beginning of labor law. Labor law was very important because law was protection of workers. Workers were weaker than the employers, and therefore they had to be defended by the state so that they could be more or less equal in the contracts. So we developed the concept of labor law as protection. On the other side of the line, in the colonies, labor law at the time was penal law, was slave labor, was forced labor, was shibalo, as was it known. But we never in our theories of labor law considered this duality, but they were constitutive. There would be no protection on this side if there were no plundering of the natural resources on the other side. Colonial appropriation and violence to guarantee regulation, emancipation on this side. The liberal theory tells us that the social contract allowed for the state of nature to be eliminated and to be replaced by civil society. That's what you read in Hobbes, that's what you read in Locke, that's what you read in Rousseau. And Hobbes is very interesting because Hobbes even says that the state of nature was in the America, the indigenous, of course, were the savage Western age. If we follow the epistemology of the South that I'm proposing to you, it's not the history of the case. The history is that state of nature and civil society are going to coexist side by side from then on. Civil society valid for the metropolitan relationships and state of nature valid for the colonial relationships. So it is not that the state of nature was replaced by civil society. The two are necessary for Western modernity. Finally, we tend to believe that the theories of citizenships are theories of inclusion, social inclusions, and of course they are. Inclusions, citizens are upgraded human persons. They are human persons with rights, and it's very important. I have no time to go into detail into this, but we have to say that from the very beginning up until now, most people in the world are excluded from citizenship. By the ways you formulate our theories of citizenship. From the very beginning, workers could not be citizens, women could not be citizens, slaves could not be citizens, colonial people could not be citizens, refugees today cannot be citizens. So many people cannot be citizens. So I think that what we consider to be a theory of inclusion is in fact a theory of social exclusion. That's why most people in the world today, in fact, they are not subjects of human rights. They are objects of our discourses of human rights. Most people. So if you take that, you see that there is abyssal law means that there is impossibility of reciprocity. If you analyze the history of modernity, it's very interesting why the indigenous and the natives in Africa could not be citizens or could not be on an equal foot. Even when they were declared citizens, they were not citizens, as the French colonial laws or the Portuguese laws make that very clear. It's because reciprocity is only possible among civilized people, and these people are not fully civilized. So the people that are not fully civilized are bound to have more duties than rights. In fact, the fact that the women who were also less civilized than men, they were close to nature. If you read Hegel, they are close, Aristotle, by the way, close to nature, so less civilized. That's why women have to have more duties than rights. No reciprocity there. So, to conclude this first part of this perpetual transition is that this history is a long history because it is based, first of all, on international law. I mean, international law is the law that is going to make the abyssal line and make it invisible at the same time. Produce it and make it invisible. And the first concepts are, if you can see, as a succession of concepts that go in the same direction, dividing the civilized people from the barbarians. From then on, up until now. How do they do that? The first one comes in Victoria, Francisco de Vitoria. Some of you know, 1530 is marvelous, in fact, fabulous text. But what he says there is that there is an overriding right for the civilized, the right to trade, to commerce. And therefore, that was the justification for the Spaniards to go to trade. And this right to trade overrun the sovereign. The sovereign cannot be against the right to trade because it's the right of civilization. Another international lawyer, very famous one that all of you have read, Hugo Grotius. Grotius is going precisely to do the same, the right to trade. The fact that he was also an employee of the Dutch company, well, is something that usually does not come in his studies. Was not just a great international lawyer, was a CEO of the Dutch East Indians Company. So if we take this, then we can see that throughout these centuries, we are going to see lots of concepts succeeding one after the next to reproduce the divide, the abyssal divide between the civilized and the savage, between the metropolitan sociability and the colonial sociability. And they follow one after the other. And when a given country is reaching that, we create new conditions that they cannot match. For instance, development. Development is one that is going to be a surrogate, an ersatz for the first forms of civilized barbarians. And of course, they are undeveloped one day. It's better than the colonial, because here you see that, in fact, one day you can be developed. But they have never been, up until now, fully transcended that condition. Then we are going to have democracy as a form of distinguishing the civilized from the savages. Is that today, I'm skipping globalization. Globalization is an element of that. But law, from the 80s, democracy becomes a conditionality for the World Bank and a sign of civilization. And this is very interesting, because up until then, there were very strict conditions for a country to be democratic. That's why there were so few democratic countries in the world. And if you read Barrington Moore's work and all the works that we read in the 70s, it was to explain why there were so few countries that were democratic in the world. Because in order to be a democracy, you need a middle class. In order to be a democracy, you need agrarian reform. In order to be a democracy, you need on and on and on, right? Well, now we don't need anything. Democracy is needed for everything else. So democracy is the condition. And now becomes a conditionality of the World Bank. And therefore, becomes an imperial weapon. Today, law and democracy are the rules of a great constitutionalist, great friend, James Tully, calls the informal imperialism. And we destroy countries to impose civilization. We destroy Libya to impose civilization. We destroy Iraq. We destroy Syria to impose civilization in the forms of democracy. So the concept of sovereignty, I don't have time to go into that. But to conclude, there are two ways, and these are very important, relevant for my argument in the following, and is that there are two ways in which colonialism is going to continue. One is through these foreign interventions that were the first great intellectual that identified this in 1965 was a great leader, political leader from Ghana, Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah, with a fabulous book called The Neo-Colonialism that should be, required reading in our schools every day, in our courses. But then there is a second form which has nothing to do with international imposition, are the local elites that reproduce colonialism internally. They have a colonial relations with the people inside. And here we have theorized that very well in the past, in Latin America, but also in Africa, with the concept of internal colonialism, which is basically what is at stake. So I think that for me, it's very clear today that the Rohingya minorities in Myanmar are victims of internal colonialism. And it is clear that this is the case, for me, at least from the reading of what's happening there. So what is the problem of this perpetual transition? Is that whenever a country may try to approach the standards of civilization, we elevate the standards. Now the standard is transparency, for instance. Now the standard is good governance. And if these countries have no good governance, they could be intervened. And I'm sure if they get good governance, something else will be invented, because the idea is that global capitalism needs that these countries, that by the way have very good natural resources, have to be available. Now, I'm not going to deal very much with the internal colonialism. I'm just trying to skip this part and go to the temporal one, the temporal transition, for the sake of time and our debate, even though I'm glad that we have a relaxed time today, and so we can then discuss. I'm going to skip part of what I have to do, I have to say, to the temporal limited transition from dictatorship to democracy, from conflict, from post-conflict, and see, in fact, the very complex relationships between law and violence in that. The first one, I think, is important to know what we need by law. Because in most of the studies on transitional justice, on restorative justice, on many of these processes, law is equated with state law. And this is the first trap. Because the power of the law in the transitions, in my way of thinking, from a sociological perspective, cannot be understood if you just restrict ourselves to law as state law. And therefore, we have to entertain the concept of legal pluralism. Plurality of laws existing in the society, because societies are heterogeneous, politically, economically, culturally, ethno-culturally, and therefore, very often, the cultural, legal premises, the normative premises are different. Different groups with different premises. So I think that the first one is that we have to unpack law and accept a strong form of legal pluralism. That's how you'd follow in this. The second one is that we have also to unpack state, because we think that is law of the state and the state as a given. The state given by colonialism is a monocultural state. And it's not surprising that the indigenous people in Latin America recently, in Bolivia and in Ecuador, they have struggled for a refoundation of the state along plurinational lines, so the so-called plurinational state. Well, there are plurinational states in Europe. Belgium is one case in that. Switzerland is also plurinational, but apparently this is no problem for us. But it's very problematic outside Europe, particularly when plurinationality means control of territories, and when those territories have precious natural resources, be they oil or minerals. Europe, in this case, is in a good position because they have nothing, but tries to plunder from the outside, but here is very little to get. So that's why it's so peaceful. So what are the elements in which law can intervene in a transition? Because they are very different elements, and some of them are incompatible among them. Peace. Mentioned the main topics of values that usually are invoked here. Peace, reconciliation, truth, justice, forgiveness, reparation, rights, healing. If you look at this plethora of concepts that are usually packed into a transitional period, post-conflict or post-dictatorship, you can see that there are going to be many contradictions between them. And that's why some countries don't even organize, for instance, truth and reconciliation commissions. For instance, Rwanda had none. And in Myanmar, it has been discussed that a truth and reconciliation commission should be useful, but as far as I know, it has not been there. So I think that if we look at the rule of law, then in this temporal transition, there are two instances, and there is an alternative. Law can go both ways. Law can be a source of violence, and can also reduce violence. And I think that if you want to be not just normative, but just more sociological about normativity, we have to consider both instances. Because in fact, I think law is much more a form of violence than a reduction of violence in most instances in these cases. Law causes violence very often. And when does it call violence? Well, when it is a foreign imposition. Whenever law or rule of law or democracy either doesn't work or ends up in violence. The best case of the waste of billions, not millions, billions and billions of dollars on what has been called rule of law promotion and democracy promotion in Russia after 1989, 91, is one of the saddest stories. Well, the case of Colombia is also interesting because the amount of money that the rule of law has been spent in Colombia for all these decades. But it's amazing how much money has been wasted, in fact. That could be to build hospitals and other things in order to impose a given law. I think that in most cases today, you can see, I see them, young people, sometimes very well committed people, and progressive people, they are in solidarity and so on, and they go to Afghanistan to teach, civil and political rights and the ideas of liberal theory as if they were in the neighborhood of Louvain-la-Neuve. Of course, it's a different world. There is where is violence? When there is a dissonance between the values that underlie the law and the values that exist in that society. And societies can only heal themselves on the basis of some kind of consonance with the normative values of those societies, not as imposition. Democracy has imposed this dictatorship. It's not democracy. So I think that if we take that seriously, then we have to analyze in the conditions of transition of how can law, in fact, be an element of reduction of violence. But it can be to the extent only that it becomes more consonant, is appropriate culturally and politically appropriated by the people there. Because if it is not appropriated, it will be a violence. Could be not physical violence, but structural violence, symbolic violence, then is reflected in society in different ways. But of course, law can be an alternative to violence. That's the sense of this seminar. Law can be, and I think that we should analyze that, even though I think that today, when we look at these transitions, and have a hard look at all these transitions that are going on, or have been going on, the results are so mediocre in general. I mean, if you take very close to the situation in Guatemala and in Salvador, in Colombia these days, I mean, they assassinated more leaders this year, and we are at the end of March, that they assassinated last year already. As the process of the peace process with LLN started. So they are assassinating all the people that are collaborating in the peace process later on. To an extent that some of us that are in solidarity with Colombia, when we go, and I'll be there in June in Cauca, at Popayan, they raise serious problems about our safety. Because the paramilitary people want to really associate, to show that no peace will be possible. So they will assassinate everyone that is associated with us. So what is this? Is law or illegality? After all, is the President Santos that is behind this. So is just not capable or doesn't want? Or is important that he keeps this ambiguity of legal and illegal violence? So I think that when I look at situations, dramatic situations in which some transition has been successful, and there are two of my knowledge that I've been working in a sense, they have been successful, but not very in the end, but with lapses. One is Mozambique, and the other is Rwanda, because of the atrocities that were committed, particularly in Rwanda. One thing that's interesting is that whenever law becomes very important as reduction of violence in this transition, is usually not the state law, but the traditional law, the community law, the law of the people, the law of the peasants, the law of the different tribes or different ethnic groups. For instance, in Rwanda, it's very clear the role that the Gakaka, which are the traditional courts in Rwanda, played. Because they even knew that they could not bring to court all the perpetrators because there were so many. But the Gakaka courts have been doing a very interesting job in trying to heal society. Why these courts? The same thing with traditional community courts. Because the community courts are not Western courts. Because they have a spiritual dimension that we don't understand in the West. The purification. How can you purify a young guy that months before was assassinating members of his family because he was in the struggle? And now the community has to receive him again. How can we heal them? By punishing, servicing to the community only or something like that? Now he has to be purified. And there are rituals of purification. Sometimes the communities go for months to do the purification rituals, to make the transition with justice, with harmony. Because the important is to restore the dignity of victims and perpetrators. That's, after all, the genius of restorative justice. But this is very difficult to do with the Western conceptions, individualist conceptions, retributive conceptions of justice. So I think that if we really try to be serious about the roles in which that law can be a reduction of violence, then we should pay attention to the fact that law has to be pluralized in the sense of accommodating cultural differences, religious differences, ethnic differences. The case of Myanmar is absolutely crucial because they are Muslims, they have different laws, they have different cultures, and of course there should be, the Sharia should have a role, and not just the Buddhist informed law in these regions. 500,000 refugees in neighbor countries now. A very silenced type of thing. And it is very important. Now you understand why I started with the perpetual transition from colonialism to colonialism. It's because what is going on in Myanmar, what is going on in Sudan, what is going on in Niger cannot be understood without colonialism. Because all these people, these Muslims, the Rohingya, these people that live in Myanmar, were part of the flows of the population that the empire was very eager to promote, sometimes force movements and flows of people against the Bengal area. So these people come from Bangladesh, come from other parts of the subcontinent by colonialism. That's why they are there now. But once we look, because of the illusion of independence, the independence has nothing to do because their independence, the colonial counts are settled. So we don't count with colonialism anymore. The fact is that we cannot understand that conflict without the colonial heritage, because that's a product of colonialism. So perpetual transition together with from dictatorship to democracy are intertwined, analytically, politically, sociologically, and culturally. So I think that only in that sense we can really address the questions of moral outrage, the needs, the actual needs, material needs of the victims that's to be attended also in a transition, the restoration of relationship between victims and perpetrators. You can imagine that sometimes it goes prior to the Western colonial period to understand Myanmar. The Buddhist clerks, what they mention usually is not British colonialism. They mention the Mughal Empire, the invasion of the Indians by the Mongols. And that these guys are the remnants, the Rohingya are the remnants of that empire. So they are still defending the nation against them. So it's very difficult for the World Bank and for the angiocracy in which we live to understand all the depth of this of his history. So I think that there are other examples that I could give you in which the success of a transition is premised upon cultural sensitivity and therefore legal pluralism. Culturally, what I call intercultural legal pluralism in my work. The other case is South Africa. I think the concept of Ubuntu was absolutely crucial for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and even for the Constitution. And I think that what is going on in South Africa is because Ubuntu, in fact, is in crisis, I would say. But Ubuntu was very important to restore the dignity of the victim and the perpetrators, because of the concept that I am because you are. So I'm a victim because you are a perpetrator because you are a victim, and we should, in order to get out of this, we have to restore our dignity together. So I think that, and I conclude, that the problematic that you have decided to follow this year is a very complex. I just give you kind of a bird's eye view of so many types of problems that we could discuss in this, how the transitions are intertwined one with the others. And I think that if we look at them, the alternatives, we'll see that some keywords will be coming in the near future, and I just ended by mentioning them. One, constitutionalism should not be dismissed, but constitutionalism from below, which is different from a Western-centric constitutionalism. Legal pluralism, as I said, common goods, goods that the transition should not allow to be object of the market, should be outside the market. If you see very close all the transitions from dictatorship to democracy in Latin America, the transitions to democracy were transitions to neoliberalism. The transition in Colombia from civil war to democracy is probably to neoliberalism and access of multinationals to the natural resources and the land in Colombia. The question of plurinationality, the question of dignity, there are many other areas which I think, I address some of them in my work, but I think these, I would like just to, in my talk, to make you more sensitive to the complexities of the topic, because we in the West, because of the imperial nature of our knowledge, particularly when it's trying to help, sometimes with very good intentions, instead of helping, we make things more difficult. Yesterday, a woman whose life has been destroyed and his family by the Syrian conflict was saying something that is very hard for the Western ears to hear. Well, the best solution for us is in Syria to be leave us alone. Don't try to intervene. Neither Russians, neither the West, neither Turkey. Leave us alone. It will solve our problem. The problem is that since very early on, the countries have not been able to solve their own problems without foreign intervention. And I think that is the case today, as it was before, I think is part of the perpetual transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor De Sousa Santos, for this very insightful and challenging talk. So now we're going to hear from Professor Jean Demac.
Okay. Est-ce qu'on peut lancer le projecteur? Il suffit de l'allumer, je pense. Ok. Au revoir.
Des gens qui...
Bien.
Peut-être on pourrait éteindre les lampes un petit
Non,
peu.
je pense que ça va aller.
Ça va venir plus
ça
fort.
va aller, oui. Ok.
Ouais.
Bien. Ben, merci, Boaventura. On m'a demandé de parler le français, mais ça ne doit pas vous empêcher d'intervenir en anglais ou en espagnol. Ici, c'est l'esprit de la Pentecôte. Et donc, nous parlons plusieurs langues. Merci, Boaventura, pour cette présentation. Je pense que tu as très bien planté le paysage. Alors, je serai relativement court sur cette intervention qui ne doit que lancer le débat, parce que je suis sûr que vous avez tous beaucoup de questions à poser à Boaventura. Je voudrais juste, Boaventura, revenir sur ces problèmes que tu as posés qui lient droit et transition. Au fond, qu'on lie les deux termes ne va pas du tout de soi. D'habitude, et notamment dans le marxisme classique, les périodes de transition ne sont pas des périodes juridiques, ce sont des périodes politiques. Et le droit sert justement à organiser les périodes qui ne sont pas en transition, qui assurent donc une continuité. Alors, je pense que en soi, déjà, la liaison de la transition et du droit est problématique pour la pensée juridique. Deuxièmement, la question, néanmoins, se pose dans un contexte socio-historique précis qui est le nôtre et qui est caractérisé depuis 30 ans par le fait qu'à mon avis, le projet central des sociétés occidentales a été de gérer les transitions des sociétés tant occidentales que non occidentales par le droit. Ce qui est nouveau. Ce n'est pas notre mode habituel, et tu l'as très bien rappelé, de colonisation. La colonisation était justement la suspension du droit dans la colonie. Il n'y avait pas de droit dans la colonie. Justement, ce qui a caractérisé, et c'est ce qui fait que la question est tellement d'actualité, la gestion de la globalisation depuis 30 ans, c'est que le droit a joué un rôle absolument stratégique dans l'organisation de la globalisation, parce qu'il permettait d'articuler à la fois des transitions internes à des pays, notamment des pays qui étaient martyrisés ou qui avaient vécu des guerres civiles ou des dictatures. Chili, pensez, Chili, ce qui est le laboratoire du constitutionnalisme global, le premier. Colombie, effectivement, Afrique du Sud, Birmanie, on peut allonger la liste. Donc le droit a constitué un élément d'une stratégie. Et donc le premier point, si tu veux, que je voudrais soulever par rapport à ce que tu as dit, c'est de souligner à quel point le constitutionnalisme qui a caractérisé la période 1980-2010-2017, donc après la guerre froide, si tu veux, grosso modo, à peu près, jusqu'à maintenant. Ce constitutionnalisme, c'est pour ça que j'ai fait un petit schéma, est différent du constitutionnalisme classique national. J'ai mis là à gauche, Classical National Constitutionalism. Ça, c'est le constitutionnalisme que tant en Amérique latine qu'en Europe ou en Amérique du Nord, nous avons connu à partir, grosso modo, des années 1830. En tout cas, dans notre cas, c'est 1830, mais aussi en Amérique latine. Donc, il y a eu, me semble-t-il, la construction, à partir de 1980, à peu près, d'un nouveau type de constitutionnalisme qui a été à la fois une variante et une transformation de ce constitutionnalisme et que j'appelle le constitutionnalisme global, global constitutionalism, qui est aussi neoliberal constitutionalism, qui a accompagné la globalisation et qui se distingue du premier constitutionnalisme classique par le fait que c'est un constitutionnalisme qui limite les pouvoirs de l'État-nation. Ça a été sa caractéristique principale. Tant la constitution chilienne que la constitution colombienne, etc., sont des constitutions qui vont limiter le pouvoir du gouvernement national en instituant une subordination à des formes de contrôle international. Commission des droits de l'homme, par-ci. En Europe, ça a été la Cour de Strasbourg et puis la Cour internationale de justice européenne. Donc, il y a une diminution, si on veut, de la référence nationale au sein de ce constitutionnalisme, l'instauration d'instances supranationales, juridictionnelles, qui sont capables d'intervenir, Commission latino-américaine sur les droits de l'homme, par exemple, ce genre de juridiction. Et deuxièmement, ce nouveau constitutionnalisme a mis l'accent sur la division du pouvoir judiciaire et du pouvoir législatif et exécutif, en soutenant la création de cours constitutionnelles au cours des 30 dernières années. C'est un mouvement absolument général, que ce soit d'ailleurs en Amérique latine ou chez nous, en Europe. On a vu diminuer, en quelque sorte, la marge de manœuvre des gouvernements, avec des tentatives de constitutionnalisation de plus en plus grandes d'un certain nombre de dispositifs sous contrôle d'une juridiction constitutionnelle possible. Souvenez-vous que Sarkozy voulait introduire la règle d'or de la réduction du déficit budgétaire dans la Constitution. Et on entend encore des choses comme ça aujourd'hui. Donc, il y a une vraie politique de constitutionnalisation, mais qui réduit le pouvoir du pouvoir national, au contraire de ce qu'avaient fait les constitutions classiques. Cela, néanmoins, est dans la même ligne que les constitutions classiques, puisqu'il s'agit de promouvoir des formes de droits humains, et d'autre part de promouvoir la légitimité électorale, c'est-à-dire une forme de démocratie que l'on peut qualifier de formelle. À mon avis, si tu veux, ce constitution, donc au-dessus, ce global neoliberal constitutionalisme a été une vraie rupture dans la pensée constitutionnelle classique. Je pense que tu n'y as pas fait allusion, mais je pense que c'est ça qui est en jeu aujourd'hui, et que aujourd'hui d'ailleurs on voit que probablement ce mouvement qui est indiqué au sommet de cette dia arrive à épuisement. Enfin, c'est comme ça que je comprends Donald Trump. C'est comme ça que je comprends, si on lit les propositions constitutionnelles de Marine Le Pen, par exemple, c'est très intéressant, ce qu'il propose, c'est le retour au constitutionnalisme national classique. Moins de pouvoir pour le juge, plus de pouvoir pour l'État-nation, la souveraineté, défense de la souveraineté, moins de droits de l'homme, parce que toute cette affaire tournait autour des droits de l'homme au niveau international, et l'affirmation radicale du pouvoir issu des urnes, de pouvoir affirmer la loi de la majorité sans contrôle juridictionnel sur les droits des minorités. Bon. Alors, la question, c'est que nous sommes aujourd'hui, je dirais ça comme ça, enfin, c'est pour tout le monde, une question, c'est pas seulement pour Boaventura, mais comment fait-on par rapport à cette opposition entre deux modèles de constitutionnalisation dont on voit bien qu'ils sont pour l'instant de plus en plus en opposition politique frontale. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que c'est l'opposition non pas des nationalistes avec les démocrates, comme on dit, c'est les nationalistes avec les néolibéraux. C'est ça qui est en jeu. C'est-à-dire que c'est le projet constitutionnaliste des néolibéraux qui est au-dessus, qui est aujourd'hui contesté par des forces politiques montantes. Bon, alors donc la question, c'est la construction, il me semble, Boaventura, je ne sais pas si tu es d'accord, de la troisième forme de constitutionnalisme, qui ne serait ni néolibéral, ni classique, national classique. Bon, alors juste pour donner quelques pistes là-dessus, il y a, me semble-t-il, 4 critiques qui sont faites au constitutionnalisme classique, c'est-à-dire le constitutionnalisme qui était là-bas en bas, à gauche, nationaliste. Il y a 4 critiques qui sont faites classiquement. La première, c'est son caractère national. Et ça, cette critique, elle est rencontrée par le néolibéralisme. Et incontestablement, les institutions que promeut le néolibéralisme, le consensus de Washington, c'est-à-dire les juridictions internationales de protection des droits de l'homme, sauvegarde, protection des droits de l'homme, sous toutes leurs formes, et d'autre part, éventuellement des accords commerciaux organisant des formes de juridiction dans le domaine commercial, comme l'Organisation mondiale du commerce. Tout ça va bien au-delà de l'État-nation. Donc cette critique était rencontrée par le néolibéralisme. Mais il y a au moins 3 critiques qui n'ont jamais été rencontrées par le néolibéralisme. Et je donne simplement la liste, je ne veux pas allonger. Première critique, on a toujours dit, et c'est ça, il me semble que ce que tu as dit à la fin, à savoir, enfin, presque à la fin, deuxième partie, qu'il faut dépasser le state-centered constitutionalism. C'est très important. Le problème de la Constitution, c'est que c'est une Constitution de l'État. Mais rien que de l'État. Ce n'est pas une constitution des pouvoirs privés. Or, dans les sociétés capitalistes, libérales, il y a des pouvoirs privés, très nombreux, qui sont des vrais pouvoirs et qui sont même des gouvernements privés quand ils atteignent un certain stade, un certain niveau d'organisation. C'est le cas de l'entreprise, c'est le cas de la famille. Bien entendu, la famille, c'est un pouvoir privé et que la Constitution, à la fois, institue, puisqu'on reconnaît le droit par le Code civil, le droit, une autonomie aux familles, une autonomie juridique. On reconnaît une autonomie commerciale, on reconnaît une autonomie du business, si vous voulez, enfin, pour dire les choses simplement, mais à travers les lois contractuelles, bien sûr, le contrat, l'institution du contrat, et en même temps, l'État permet une très grande liberté, une très très grande liberté de ses pouvoirs. Donc la Constitution s'arrête à l'État. Donc la question c'est pour ça que j'ai un intérêt dans ce que tu fais, comment peut-on constitutionnaliser les pouvoirs privés ? Faut-il les constitutionnaliser ? Donc, comment peut-on aller au-delà de l'État ? Deuxième critique, jamais rencontrée, justement pas par le néolibéralisme, puisque le néolibéralisme permet le déchaînement, en quelque sorte, des pouvoirs privés. Troisième critique, la question de la version très réduite de la démocratie, qui est donnée par le constitutionnalisme classique, qui va être encore accentuée par Marine Le Pen si elle gagne les élections en France. La démocratie, c'est le pouvoir du peuple à travers les urnes. Donc, on réduit à des mécanismes formels de représentation ou de suffrage universel la démocratie. C'est ce que aussi rêvait de faire Bush en Irak. C'était très simple. Hein. Ce qu'il voulait faire, c'était envahir l'Irak et puis organiser des élections. Ça, au fond, c'était ça, son schéma de démocratie. On envahit l'Irak et puis on organise des élections. Ça ne s'est pas passé comme ça. Donc, cette version réduite de la démocratie, comment peut-on constitutionnaliser des formes de participation et pas seulement de représentation au niveau, les 3 niveaux que tu cites toujours, Boaventura, c'est très bien, c'est une très bonne simplification, le niveau international, le niveau national, le niveau local. Que veut dire la démocratie participative constitutionnalisée, pas seulement la représentation. Et puis la 4e critique qui est faite au constitutionnalisme classique, me semble-t-il, c'est la version réduite des droits humains. Au fond, le propre de tant la version global constitutionalism que la version nationale, c'est de donner une version très sélective des droits humains qui comptent. Et cette version sélective consiste toujours, ça a toujours été le cas, depuis le début de la modernité, classique ou non, pour le constitutionnalisme, à privilégier les droits civils et politiques au détriment des droits sociaux et culturels. Or, justement, ce que fait Boaventura dans son travail, c'est de redonner, en quelque sorte, du poids, en tout cas aux droits culturels. Je trouve que tu mets beaucoup l'accent sur les droits culturels, mais aussi aux droits sociaux, enfin, la tradition de la critique socialiste du constitutionnalisme. Donc, je pense que c'est comme ça que moi je reprendrai la question. Nous sommes à une période de charnière où on voit que la variante du haut du constitutionnalisme est en train de s'affaiblir parce qu'elle n'est probablement pas soutenable. Pour diverses raisons, on peut analyser sociologiquement pourquoi. Aujourd'hui, tant dans les classes dirigeantes que dans les classes populaires, le consensus de Washington est en train de s'effondrer. J'en suis persuadé, on est vraiment rentré dans une autre période. Maintenant, le problème, donc il y a cet effondrement, il y a la résurgence du constitutionnalisme le plus classique, sous la forme enfin, les déclarations de Trump à l'égard des juges, la volonté de la souveraineté, Marine Le Pen, même Boaventura. Si vous écoutez bien Boaventura, il tient exactement le même discours, tout pro-européen qu'il se prétend. Donc, je pense que c'est comme ça qu'on pourrait qualifier la problématique. Et je crois que c'est de cette façon que, effectivement, je trouve que tu as raison de mettre l'accent sur le fait que notre relation du Nord au Sud a été marquée par la négation du droit dans le Sud. Mais c'était vrai jusqu'en 1980, ça. À partir des années 1980-1990, le Nord n'a pas ignoré, c'est pas ça exactement, l'importance du droit pour les sociétés du Sud. Il a cherché à imposer une version particulière de ce droit, qui est cette version que vous trouvez là au-dessus de la DIA. Donc je pense que c'est à partir de là qu'on peut discuter. Merci beaucoup. C'est tout.
Merci beaucoup, Jean, pour ce lancement de discussion tout à fait passionnant. Maintenant, on va passer la parole à Maria Angelica Sánchez Álvarez, qui va nous partager quelques réflexions issues de son travail de thèse en droit, ici, au sein du Centre de philosophie du droit.
Bonjour à tous et à tous. Je vous lis. Pour commencer, je voudrais remercier pour cette invitation qui me permet de dialoguer avec un auteur important, spécialement pour le cadre de ma recherche doctorale. Mon intervention s'inscrit dans l'ample discussion développée par l'auteur sur la modernité, Pour commencer, le professeur affirme qu'il existe une ligne abyssale qui a comme fonction de diviser le monde en deux parties. D'un côté se trouve l'Occident, qui est composé par les peuples civilisés situés dans les contrats sociaux et sur lesquels on applique le paradigme de la régulation-émancipation. Dans ce paradigme, le droit a un rôle fondamental en ordonnant les relations de la société civile sous la dichotomie du légal et de l'illégal. D'un autre côté, se trouve le monde colonisé où s'applique la logique de l'appropriation-violence. L'état de nature, c'est-à-dire le domaine du non-droit. Ces lignes abyssales, pendant longtemps, a divisé le contrat social de l'état de nature et s'est transformé pendant les dernières décennies grâce à son déplacement. C'est ainsi que le colonial, qui est considéré selon la logique de l'appropriation-violence, a envahi l'espace des métropoles, l'espace occidental de l'émancipation-régulation, c'est-à-dire l'état de nature s'est inséré dans différents espaces à l'intérieur de ces côtés de la ligne, dans le contrat social. Toutefois, ce phénomène n'a pas seulement été provoqué par des facteurs externes au droit, tels que l'implémentation de l'ordre capitaliste néolibéral, mais à l'intérieur du même ordre normatif, l'état d'exception, compris comme la faculté qu'a les souverains, selon Schmitt, c'est surprendre un pacte de système juridique qui a pour but s'affronter en crise, a permis qu'à l'intérieur du droit se créent des espaces où l'ordre normatif maintient sa validité sans être appliqué. L'abus de l'état d'exception de la part de divers États pendant le XXe siècle a permis la configuration des espaces et des moments vides de droit. Les zones sauvages, selon Agamben, sont les camps de concentration qui existent sans que la déclaration officielle de l'état d'exception ne soit plus nécessaire. Comme l'affirme Benjamin, l'état d'exception, l'exception est devenue la règle. De cette façon, la normalité juridique se mélange avec l'exceptionnalité, la logique de la régulation et émancipation se contamine par la logique de l'appropriation-violence. Ainsi, le professeur de Sousa affirme que l'État moderne est l'état d'exception, qui n'hésite pas à sacrifier des droits pour sauver des droits, à sacrifier des vies pour sauver des vies. Depuis cette perspective, l'état d'exception est devenu un canal par lequel l'état de nature est retourné et a colonisé le contrat social. Les lieux d'exception se trouvent partout. Ils sont dans les quartiers pauvres, à la prison, dans les maisons de prostitution. Là-bas, les structures dans lesquelles reposent les droits et l'État n'existent pas. C'est ainsi que l'état d'exception est partout, au coin de la rue. Ces choses passent près de votre maison. C'est arrivé près de chez vous pour emprunter le titre du fil belge bien connu. Dans ce contexte subit le fascisme social, qui est défini par le professeur de Sousa Santos comme l'essor d'un régime social de relations de pouvoir extrêmement inégal qui donne à la partie la plus forte un droit de veto sur la vie et le soutien de la partie la plus fragile. Le fascisme social a des formes différentes, tels le fascisme de l'apartheid social, le fascisme territorial, le fascisme contractuel, etc. Ce fascisme social favorise la structuration d'ordres alternes sous l'ordre de l'État. En Colombie, plus concrètement, m'interpelle l'apparition de 12 sortes de fascisme. Le fascisme de l'État parallèle et le fascisme para-étatique, qui est le fascisme du paramilitarisme. Ces réalités mettent en évidence le besoin de repenser, comme l'a fait le professeur Boaventura De Sousa, le concept de transition et aussi l'idée de refonder l'État. Le processus de transition est un processus historique à long terme qu'on ne retrouve pas dans les courtes durées de transition démocratique auxquelles nous sommes habitués. Il exige, par contre, d'après de ce que je comprends, un effort politique et social de reconstruction des liens et des mentalités. Depuis la perspective juridique, le constitutionnalisme transformateur est une des instances les plus décisives de l'usage anti-hégémonique d'un outil hégémonique. À partir de ce postulat, j'aimerais poser au professeur de Sousa Santos les questions suivantes. La situation actuelle d'Occident nous confronte de deux manières différentes. La première, j'appellerais négative, nous enseigne les démocraties et les États fondés dans un système d'inégalité et d'oppression. La sensation d'Occident est qu'on ne se sent plus en sécurité. Le retour de l'état de nature avec sa violence et ses exclus sont partout. La deuxième, que j'appellerais positive, nous présente une opportunité de repenser la société, l'État et les droits. Face à la première confrontation, la négative, comme je l'appelle, comment est-il possible de restructurer les droits sur base de fondements qui restituent son caractère émancipateur, quand il s'agit d'États qui ne sont pas intéressés de donner de l'espace afin d'initier un processus de réelle transition constitutionnelle, c'est-à-dire d'États caméléonesques qui se sont adaptés à l'existence de zones d'exceptionnalité dans son intérieur, comme par exemple l'État français ou le colombien. Dans cette perspective, la deuxième question, dans cette perspective, attire mon attention le rôle du pluralisme juridique commun à le monde qui permet la reconnaissance de pluralité et la construction de consensus. Cependant, quand nous abordons les réalités complexes telles que la colombienne, ressort le fait qu'il existe des ordres alternes qui ne correspondent pas aux communautés indigènes, aux personnes afrodescendantes, pour faire un exemple, mais qui sont construites par des groupes armés qui n'ont pas de connotation politique et qui répondent à des intérêts criminels. À l'intérieur du grand capital représenté par des multinationales qui cherchent à exploiter des ressources ou activités de trafic de drogue. Ces espaces donnent lieu à des zones d'état de nature, j'oserais dire à des pluralismes négatifs. Dans ce contexte, comment est-il possible de faire des liens et dialogues avec ces classes d'ordres alternes, en évitant l'usage de la violence, Ou inévitablement, l'ordre normatif devra utiliser la violence légitime afin de garantir un espace de dialogue. D'une autre manière, comment sortir de la logique de l'exercice de la violence droit quand il s'agit de contextes tels que ceci. Pour finir, le dernier, j'aimerais faire référence au processus de paix en Colombie qui a eu lieu entre le gouvernement et la guérilla de FARC un processus de dialogue complexe qui a duré plusieurs années et qui, à la fin, a été durement critiqué, spécialement parce que beaucoup de personnes pensent qu'il n'a pas eu lieu un ample débat qui aurait inclus les exclus de Colombie, qui sont les classes pauvres, les pauvres. À côté de ces critiques se trouve le fait que l'accord de paix a été mis en route sans la réalisation d'une assemblée constitutionnelle dans laquelle soulevait la question d'une refondation de l'État ou au moins de repenser les droits, l'État et l'économie, comme l'a exigé la guérilla à un moment. Évidemment, l'accord de paix est un succès très important à travers lequel on parvient à incorporer un groupe armé insurgent qui trouve ses racines dans l'injustice sociale, favorisée par le modèle économique extractiviste et par l'oligarchie politique. De même, je pense que l'accord soit effectué dans le cadre d'un État néolibéral, car c'est celui que nous avons. Mais dans ce contexte, professeur, je vous demande de me répondre à la question: quelle pourrait être la viabilité d'un accord de paix qui n'implique pas une transition constitutionnelle inclusive, qui permet de replanter la possibilité d'un État plurinational réel et un projet de paix où le sujet du modèle économique restait intouchable, car il n'est pas un objet d'un débat démocratique.